Afternoon Adventures. Here today to talk about darts specifically. I made a video not that long ago about throwing weapons in general and how they can be buffed by various things. I did take a paladin forward approach in that video, and I want to call out darts specifically because some of the things that I called out in that video, like the smite spells and the paladin's level 11 radiant strikes feature, don't apply to the dart, as it is the only throwing weapon that is also a ranged weapon, not a melee weapon. That might not mean a whole lot on the surface, but it means it interacts in a different way with certain rules, certain features, certain spells, and just generally fits in a unique place in the game because of that difference. One way darts differ in just a general rules sense is that they can't be used to make opportunity attacks, as those have to be made with a melee weapon or an unarmed strike. Technically, Warcaster can be used to cast True Strike and attack with a dart, but that's its own little niche thing. A couple of the features that work differently for melee weapons and ranged weapons would be the Sharpshooter feat. Now, if you watched my other video, you know that part of it applies to thrown weapons, that being the ignoring 1/2 3/4 cover part, but the other two bullet points don't, not including the ability score increase. Of course, that applies to anyone. The parts where we ignore disadvantage from being at long range and we ignore disadvantage from being within 5 feet of an enemy only apply to ranged weapons, making the dart the only thrown weapon that can benefit from those things. Because of that, darts end up with triple the range, without disadvantage, of the other throwing weapons, as they all have a short range of 20 feet and a long range of 60 feet. Of course, the javelin is an outlier in that aspect. It has a short range of 30 feet, which is doubled by the sharpshooter dart instead of tripled, and a long range of 120 feet, which frankly the dart can't match. It also means darts are the only throwing weapon that we can throw within 5 feet of an enemy and not have disadvantage in the whole game, period. Sharpshooter gives that benefit to ranged weapons, Crossbow Expert gives that benefit to crossbows specifically, and Spell Sniper gives that benefit to spells, but nothing in the game can give that benefit to melee thrown weapons. So darts are the only one. Secret third point, not really, but it's worth mentioning. In the 2014 version of the rules, Sharpshooter came with the bonus that you could take a -5 penalty to your attack roll and gain +10 damage if the attack hits anyway. That's no longer a thing in 2024, but if your group hasn't moved on to the 2024 rules yet, you can take that, and that does work with darts, as they are ranged weapons. They're the only thrown weapons, and because of that, the highest damage thrown weapons in the game, as long as you have this feat. Easily, if you hit with those attacks. But that's not a thing in the current version of the rules, and that's where I like to focus my videos, so that's all the talk I'm going to do about that. I would have been remiss not to bring it up, just in case people are still on those rules. I didn't want to leave it out. But it is no longer a thing in the 2024 version. There aren't that many other feats that even apply to darts, and even some of those aren't really that good. For example, Savage Attacker allows us to roll our weapon damage twice and take the higher result once per turn. That doesn't mean a whole lot when we're attacking with a d4. That's only ever going to gain us at most 3 extra damage, so it's not probably worth our origin feat. Similarly, Piercer lets us re-roll 1 damage die per turn, so if we roll a 1 on that d4, we can re-roll it, but again, that's only going to add a small amount of damage. Getting an extra die of damage on a critical hit, rolling 3 dice instead of 2, can be really cool and fun, but again, d4, we're only adding 1 to 4 extra damage in that case. It's not worth a feat in my opinion. We will put a pin in that and circle back to it later because there is one exception that makes those feats good. Interestingly, as finesse weapons, weapons with the finesse property, darts do count for the defensive duelist feat, which means if we have a dart in hand, despite it being a ranged weapon, we can use it to parry, or however you want to describe it, melee attacks until the start of our next turn, gaining extra AC equal to our proficiency bonus. This feat is incredible in the 2024 version of the rules, and we can use it with a dart in hand. Darts and daggers are the only weapons that can be used to make ranged attacks and be used with defensive duelist. So they have a defensive advantage over other throwing weapons and ranged weapons alike if we have that feat. The Poisoner feat works just fine, especially since darts don't have the light property. We can't do the 2-weapon fighting thing with them, so having our bonus action free to apply poison to our darts for potentially an extra 2d8 damage could actually be a good use of our bonus action. That's going to depend on our class and our build, of course. Some characters will already have a use for their bonus action on most or all turns. Like I said earlier, Warcaster can be used to make a ranged weapon attack with the dart. If we have Sharpshooter, we won't have disadvantage. Remember, the attack is made before the creature leaves our reach, which would be the reach we have with our unarmed strikes, because enemies can't provoke an opportunity attack from a ranged weapon, if that makes sense. There is also, just in case anyone's wondering, no interaction at all with the Sentinel feat. Warcaster replaces the opportunity attack with a spell, so we don't get to reduce the creature's speed to 0. And that feat also gives extra triggers for opportunity attacks, but by a strict reading of Warcaster, that feat says when a creature provokes an opportunity attack from you by leaving your reach. So it is very specific on the trigger that can trigger Warcaster. Is it even worth using Warcaster to make True Strike attacks as op attacks? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. It really is going to depend on your build. If you would otherwise take Warcaster, then great. But I wouldn't go out of my way for this one, personally. And Weapon Master can, of course, give a weapon mastery property to classes that don't normally get them. But as usual, I recommend just taking a level of fighter. You'll get a fighting style, you'll get multiple weapon masteries, you'll get second wind, and all those things are really good. Not to mention, if it's your first level, you'll also get access to all armors, all weapons, and constitution and strength saving throws. Overall, way better. I made a video a while back on why a level of fighter is worth like 5 feats, and that's probably actually more like 6 now, because of weapon masteries. When in doubt, level of fighter. I didn't really touch on epic boon feats in my other video, but that's because they're pretty straightforward and apply regardless of weapon. So the boon of irresistible offense can give extra damage to our critical hits, which is nice, and lets us ignore resistance to piercing damage that our darts deal. That almost never comes up anyway, so whether that part will be useful is a little up for debate, but extra damage on crits is not bad. Also, the Boon of Combat Prowess lets us hit with an attack that would otherwise miss once per turn. I don't find myself missing a lot at higher levels, especially since the Vex property is going to be giving us advantage a lot of the time, but if you miss, you could not miss instead. Myself, I like to take epic boons that give me utility or other sort of usefulness that's not just like you hit instead of missing, but that's just me. I like to teleport when I take the attack action, or I like to get half my health back if I would fall to 0. Things like that. There are lots of really good epic boon feats. I don't think we really need to use one to buff our thrown weapons specifically, but you can if you want. So with all that having been said, how do we build a character that makes good use of darts? I have spent the better part of the last few days poring over class features, feats, spells, magic items, all of it trying to find an answer to that question. And the conclusion that I've been able to draw is that there isn't really any one build that does it way better than anyone else. Not because darts are bad by any means, but just because there are so many options. First and foremost, throwing weapons only require one hand, so we can use our other one to hold a shield, or cast spells, open doors, pull levers, the usual things that you need an open hand for, or even grapple enemies. Though we will want Sharpshooter for that so we don't have disadvantage on our dart attacks. The simple fact that throwing weapons are one-handed makes them a better fit for defensive playstyles. If you want to throw weapons and also have a shield, you can have a higher AC than someone using, say, a bow or most crossbows. Technically, someone could use a hand crossbow and a shield if they have the crossbow expert feat, otherwise they need a free hand to load the hand crossbow. So it's effectively still kind of a two-handed weapon. Second, as I was kind of alluding to earlier, but to put it in a more definite way, darts are the only weapon in the whole game that can benefit from the archery fighting style, giving +2 to attack rolls, the thrown weapon fighting style, giving +2 to damage rolls, sharpshooter, all of its effects, and defensive duelist. There's only one weapon that can do that, and it's darts. With sharpshooter, darts have the longest range without disadvantage of any thrown weapon. In fact, any one-handed weapon, as hand crossbows, even with crossbow expert, still only have a maximum range of 60 feet, just like darts. And weirdly, it's tied with the Soul Knife Rogue's Ghost Blades. That subclass summons the blades and can throw them up to 60 feet without disadvantage, 120 feet with disadvantage. So kind of the best of both in that sense. Most throwing weapons have a maximum range of 60, and javelins have a long range of 120, and these ghost daggers are the best of both somehow. They are melee weapons though, so they still can't benefit from archery or sharpshooter. So there's that. The archery fighting style means that darts have the highest attack bonus of any thrown weapon, because the other ones are all melee. They can't benefit from the fighting style at all. With the thrown weapon fighting style, darts have a comparable damage to a D8 weapon, like a light crossbow or a longbow, and by extension has better damage than a hand crossbow. And like I said earlier, defensive duelist can be used with a dart in hand. We do have to make sure that we have one in hand at the end of our turn after throwing them. We gotta make sure we draw another. Just keep that in mind, but that's a thing that those ghost blades can't do because they disappear right after an attack is made. So take that, rogues, I guess. Third, and a little more specifically, darts can be made into monk weapons with either the level 2 feature dedicated weapon from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, or the Kensei Monk subclass from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Both of those can make darts a monk weapon, increase their damage die to a d6 right away now in tier 1, and increase the damage further at levels 5 to a d8, 11 to a d10, and 17 to a d12. If we throw the thrown weapon fighting style on top of that, darts quickly outdamage any other ranged weapon in the game right away at level 2 or 3 when we get those features. And if we have the fighting style from, for example, a level of fighter, having 1d6 plus 2 damage already puts us on par with a d10 weapon like a heavy crossbow. The highest damage ranged weapon in the game, unless muskets are involved in your campaign. Entirely possible. If that's the case, once we're monk level 5 and have a d8 plus 2 from the fighting style, now we're on par with those muskets. And of course, once it goes up to a d10 and a d12, now we're just straight up out-damaging the other ranged weapons as a whole. And here's where I want to circle back, because having a higher damage die, a larger damage die, than a d4 makes Savage Attacker and Piercer actually way more viable as feats. Dealing an extra d8 or d10 or d12 with our critical hits, dealing, 3d10 instead of 2d10, is actually a noticeable increase. And rerolling a 1 or a 2, let's say, into something that might be potentially much higher can also add quite a bit of damage turn after turn, even without critical hits. Or with Savage Attacker, being able to roll our damage dice twice, especially if we do get a crit. Roll those 3d10 twice and pick the higher one. We could even get a little crazy and use both feats. When we get a crit, let's say, roll 3d10. If we get 2 high dice and 1 low die, pick that option, re-roll the low die, potentially get even more damage. Not really worth it with d4s, but for a monk, it can work. And of course, bonus points if you have Elven Accuracy and or champion levels and you can crit more often. There's certainly a build there, I feel like. Monks can also get a feature called Key Fueled Attack from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which allows them to make an attack with a monk weapon as a bonus action if their action involves spending any amount of focus points. That could potentially allow them to attack 3 times in one turn, especially with things like Focused Aim and the Kensei's Deft Strike feature at level 6, which allow us to augment our attacks with focus points. And hey, attacking 3 times is always going to be better than attacking twice. Now, throwing weapons do come with a bit of an issue in that when we throw a weapon, now it's all the way across the room. We can't really attack with it again unless we walk over and pick it up. That means that having magic darts is something that's probably pretty unlikely to happen. Fighting styles can help with that, adding to our attack and damage rolls, but there is another way around. Artificers can use the returning weapon infusion to turn one weapon with the thrown property into a +1 version of itself that also comes back after we throw it, hit or miss. Some features in the game, like the Gloomstalker's Sudden Strike or Hunter Ranger's Horde Breaker require that the extra attack that they give us is made with the same weapon, and a bit of a generous interpretation of that rule could be that attacking with the same type of weapon counts. So strictly by raw, we do need returning weapon for those things, and either way, it removes all the doubt anyway. And on top of the +1 bonus that the infusion gives the weapon, we can use other spells, features, even magic items, to bolster one weapon's damage even further. For example, the Helm of Brilliance can be used to ignite a weapon in fire, and then until we drop or stow the weapon, it deals an extra 1d6 fire damage. To my mind, throwing a weapon at an enemy and having it come back to you isn't the same as dropping it, so that would totally work in my games, but probably worth checking with your DM. One thing that does undoubtedly work, though, is the Holy Weapons spell. Familiar with my channel, you know I love this thing. It's a 5th level cleric and paladin spell that lets you enchant one weapon. It can even be a magic weapon, unlike the magic weapon and elemental weapon spells, for example. And for the duration of 1 hour requiring concentration, that weapon sheds light in a radius and also deals an extra 2d8 radiant damage with every attack. Put that on a returning dart and keep throwing it. That's practically a Divine Smite on every attack anyway. Bonus points if you're a War Cleric, and you can use the War Priest feature to attack as a bonus action. That's potentially 6d8 damage, or an average of 27 radiant damage, every turn. A returning weapon can also be a great candidate for Pact of the Blade Warlocks. Since it is a magic weapon, they can form a pact with the returning dart, and that will allow them to use Charisma for their attack and damage rolls, as well as enabling other invocations like Thirsting Blade, Devouring Blade, and Life Drinker, for example, to raise their damage and make multiple attacks with their action. As well as Eldritch Smite if they want to spend a spell slot, dealing a bunch more damage and potentially knocking a creature prone. Like I said, there isn't really one build that shines super brightly over the others when it comes to darts, at least none that I've put together yet. So what I'm going to do for this video is make sort of a framework that we can plant into the chassis of any class or subclass that uses weapons. Obviously, I hope it's obvious, this isn't going to be for your sorcerers and wizards, that kind of thing. But for anyone who uses weapons and wants to use darts for their enhanced range and no disadvantage from close up, and one-handed nature, and darts can use strength or dexterity because they are finesse weapons, so they should fit in to a huge variety of martial and gish type characters. The core of it is 4 feats that we'll need. It feels weird saying 4 feats because 2 of those are fighting styles. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but it feels odd calling those feats. In any case, we need 2 feats and 2 fighting styles. Those, of course, being Sharpshooter, for reasons that I'm sure are obvious by now as I keep repeating them. The other is Defensive Duelist, a powerful defensive move that we can do as a reaction that most other ranged characters aren't going to be able to pull off. That one can wait until a little higher level. I would say take Sharpshooter first, as Defensive Duelist scales with our proficiency bonus, which is of course going to be higher at higher levels. As for the fighting style feats, we of course want Archery and the Thrown Weapon fighting style, giving +2 to our attack and damage rolls. And those we can get from a level of Fighter, that's the easiest way at least, and 2 levels of either Paladin or Ranger, or 3 levels of Swordsbard with a bit of a generous interpretation on their fighting style feature. When that subclass was printed in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, they were limited to the dueling and 2-weapon fighting styles. Given the changes to the design philosophy around fighting styles and letting, for example, Rangers and Paladins access to all of the fighting styles, just like fighters have, I would extend that to the Swordsbard, although strictly by raw that's not the case. So, might not be AL legal, but you can do it in a home campaign with DM approval. And as I keep alluding to in this video, darts are the only weapons that can benefit from those 4 feats, so we might as well lean in. If we're planning on playing a Ranger or a Paladin already, then it's as easy as just taking 1 level of Fighter. And if we're planning on playing as a Fighter, it's as easy as taking 2 levels of Ranger or Paladin. Both of them get some pretty cool level 1 spells, and a handful of other features as well. Rangers get Expertise, Paladins get a little bit of lay on hands. They both get other things. They're both good choices. Of course, champion fighters just get a second fighting style at level 7, so they don't have to multiclass at all. And if 2 levels is too much of an investment, we do have the option to take more fighting styles in place of other feats when we get feats at levels 4, 6, 8 for a fighter. Since fighters and rogues get extra feats, that's not as big a cost for them, although it doesn't come with bonuses to our ability scores, and they aren't as powerful as general feats, so it usually feels kind of bad taking a fighting style in place of a general feat, but it is an option. If we want to save those 2 levels and be a pure class fighter or multiclass a different way but without those other classes blended into the mix, it is an option, and it's nice to have options. And that's really the heart of it. With those 4 feats, we have a very respectable 60-foot range with no disadvantage from 0 to 60 feet. We ignore partial cover. We get +2 to attack and damage rolls. We can use a reaction to add between 2 and 6, or potentially 7 with a certain magic item, to our armor class for an entire round at a time with no limit on its use. It doesn't cost a resource or anything. Improve our AC against melee attacks specifically, I should keep specifying that. And all of that with 1 to 3 levels multiclassing and 2 or 3 feats, 3 if we don't take those 2 levels of multiclassing. And heck, if we want to give up one of those fighting styles and have just +2 to either attack or damage rolls, we can just have 1 level of fighter, 2 feats, that's it. That's all it takes. And we can put that framework on a huge variety of classes, multi-classes, subclasses, builds in general. Rangers have a number of spells that work with darts, like Ensnaring Strike, Hail of Thorns, Hunter's Mark, Lightning Arrow, and Guardian of Nature from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Those can all work with darts just fine. Rogues get Sneak Attack. Barbarians' bonuses can apply to any attack that uses Strength now, ranged or not, as long as they use Strength, including extra damage from Rage, including advantage from Reckless Attack, and can even include damage from things like Frenzy and Divine Fury from subclasses. Valor Bards, Eldritch Knights, and Bladesinger Wizards can use True Strike to add radiant damage without having to sacrifice their extra attack. Other classes can, of course, use the spell as well, but don't get to make multiple attacks, one of them being True Strike, like those subclasses can. Paladins can't use smite spells with darts as they are ranged weapons, but they can use Divine Favor and Crusader's Mantle. Those two apply to any weapon attack at all. Clerics and Druids can even add damage with their Divine Strike and Primal Strike features, respectively, at level 7, and even more damage at level 14. The list goes on and on and on. There are plenty of things that can add to the damage a weapon deals in this edition of the game. I'm almost ready to wrap up this video, but since I've talked so much about darts' strengths, I would be remiss not to go over their weaknesses as well. The most glaring one is that they don't have the light property, and they don't have the Nick mastery property. Making 2 attacks with darts is often gonna pale in comparison to making 4 attacks with daggers or light hammers. Just sheerly making twice as many attacks, assuming the character has extra attack and dual wielder, of course. Dealing twice as many attacks is going to lead to twice as much damage if you've got the 2-weapon fighting style to add your modifiers properly to those extra attacks. Darts don't need the 2-weapon fighting style, which opens them up for archery and or the throwing style, so that's nice. A little bit of silver lining there. It also does mean that dart users have our bonus actions free to use things like Poisoner, or command our Primal Companion as a Beastmaster Ranger, or use Cunning Action or Focus as a Monk or Rogue or Monk. So it's not all bad. And there are other ways to get bonus action attacks in the game. I think I've alluded to both the ones that I know off the top of my head, Key-fueled attacks as a monk, or focus-fueled attacks, as I guess it would now be called, and War Priest from the War Cleric are 2 very good examples of that. The other major downside is that darts are very unlikely to be magical, or at least we're unlikely to have enough of them to matter in a drawn-out fight. Even if we have 2 + 3 darts, for our 2 attacks on our first turn. What do we do on our second and third turn? We throw normal darts, I guess. So that does put throwing weapon users as a whole, not just dart users, at a disadvantage compared to someone with a bow or crossbow, just by the nature of how those weapons work. There is a way around it though, and that is the Path of the Giants Barbarian. They get a feature at level 6 that lets them sort of enchant a weapon, magical or non-magical, doesn't matter, and that weapon gains the thrown property if it doesn't already have it, with a range of 20 feet and a long range of 60 feet, no less. We're already getting more than that with our dart setup. And the weapon comes back to us after we throw it. It even deals an extra d6 of elemental damage of our choosing. Now that only applies during our rage. Keep in mind we also get bonuses to our damage from rage, but it's pretty much the only way that I can think of to make a magic dart return to our hand. We can use the Artificer Infusion to make a dart +1 and return to our hand, but if we want something like a +3 dart or a vicious dart, we can do that with Path of Giants Barbarian. Of course, those barbarians can use any weapon for this, so they could be hucking great axes at people if they want to for a d12, but darts are an option, and they do have those other benefits like wielding a shield and having longer range. And a great axe hucking barbarian can't use defensive duelist, so AC is through the dang roof with the dart using barbarian. Plus, who ever heard of a barbarian with a 60-foot effective fighting distance? I think it's not too shabby myself. And with that, I think that's all I have to say on darts for now. They fit in an interesting niche in the game because of their status as ranged weapons that have the thrown and finesse properties. They interact in interesting ways with a lot of features that you might not think of for other weapons, and simply don't apply for other weapons. So, the point of the video is, I think they're neat. That's about all I'm really trying to say. No, for real though. There are certainly builds that can be put together that can make use of the longer range, lack of disadvantage. I feel like I'm repeating myself. For real though, I feel like there's really something there with maybe like a Kensei Monk, Path of Giants Barbarian mix. Maybe throw some Rogue in there just for fun. So anyway, that's about all I wanted to say on that. Thank you so much for watching through to the end of the video. The algorithm really does like that, as well as remembering to like, comment, subscribe, and hit bullseyes for 50 points every time. Yeah, outro. And if you have a character that uses darts, please let me know in the comments what sort of stuff you got going on build-wise. I want to hear about it. I want to hear more possibilities that I haven't even thought of yet, because I know there are some. And I hope you have fun adventuring in 2025. Have a good day. Bye.